Welcome back, everyone, to the Root Cause Solutions for You podcast. My name is Fabiola, and I am your host. Today, I have a very special guest with us, Dr. Randy Michaux. He is a doctor of chiropractic. He is also a holistic health coach. He is a neuroencoder specialist. He's a husband, a father of five, and he loves pushing things to the envelope. He loves doing pushing himself to do hard things. He also enjoys backpacking, endurance races, and having real conversations with people. Today, we're going to be talking about Lyme disease and its co-infections and how this can be the root cause of chronic illness. So we hope that you enjoyed this interview. Dr. Randy, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is great.
If you could please introduce yourself. Let us know your background, what led you to be on this path about helping people, finding out the root cause of their ailments, and then we'll start from there.
Sure. Thank you. So by training, I'm a chiropractor. And so I've always had like an interest in health. Had some really cool experiences of how like chiropractic became the thing that I wanted to do. And then was 2014. So 9 years ago, my things were going well. And then my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And he got the diagnosis July 14th. He died September 30th. And, I knew he was sick long before that, but it wasn't really until that experience happened that I realized, man, there's a lot of stuff you don't know.
Yeah.
Like that I felt like I needed to learn, that was important. And some things leading up to his death, our relationship wasn't great. And so I had started learning some other things, emotion code, body code, that really helped me. But it wasn't until probably 6 months later that after he died, it was like, you really need to take a hard look at nutrition, at root cause. And I didn't even use the term root cause at the time, but just what are the underlying causes that would cause cancer, that would cause these other conditions to happen. Because I saw it in my own patients as well, that things they weren't getting better from, no matter how much I was going to adjust them, they weren't improving with things.
Yeah.
And that led me down a path that has now moved me from Virginia to Boise, Idaho, to working with Dr. Todd Watts, and then, kind of handing over the clinic. And so it's really been a challenging but beautiful change. And there's so much that I've embraced and learned and come to realize. And getting to the root is so essential, because for so many, they're still stuck in symptom care. And they think that treating symptoms is the way to go, when it's so much deeper than that. And there's so many things underlying to what they feel or what, their doctor tells them. And it takes some time to figure those things out and define them. But there's a root cause to every disease. And I think that's really what we need to be searching for.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think we either as patients, clients, ourselves who've been ill or not well, or a family member, you're right, we get caught up on symptomology, and then we just go from medication to medication, from supplement to supplement, from bouncing from one specialist to another. And then unfortunately, a lot of people out there without any real solutions, which I think people are hungry for solutions nowadays. I think especially since COVID, there's been a real hunger for I really want to I want to be better, I want to be healthier, have a stronger immune system. And I think you're right, getting to the root cause is so important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Let's talk about Lyme disease. And I mean, I think it's a subject that by now, hopefully, a lot of people are, aware of. And I think there's been a lot of work by many professions, chiropractors, functional medicine, even different foundations that are trying to raise awareness and really trying to change the way Lyme disease is viewed in the medical field. because it hasn't always been acknowledged as
Right.
something, as a disease, right? And
Yep.
it hasn't always been the easiest thing for people to really understand how one can have Lyme disease, the different co-infections that are involved within Lyme disease, and how one could go about recovering from it and trying to potentially avoid recurrences of it. So tell us a little bit about that, and what your experience with Lyme disease has been throughout your career.
Yeah. So something that really helped me was my own family, right? I've never really suffered from Lyme disease like many others have. And I'll get into that, like what it is and the co-infections. I remember after we moved from Virginia to here, and Virginia is like Lyme Central, right? Where I lived, there's so much Lyme disease, and I'd hear about it from patients, but I'm like, oh, okay, you have Lyme, you have a doctor that's
Yeah.
helping you, great. Didn't really know much until moved to Idaho, and pretty traumatic for my family, just uprooting everything they knew. And within about 3 months, 4 months, my now 15-year-old started to say, "Dad, like I'm just really tired." And he's outdoor kid, loves baseball, loves sports, but he's like, "I'm just so tired, and like you just need to go to bed sooner." Right. And then he starts talking about joint pain. Like, man, I can't move my elbow. It really hurts. And my chiropractic hat's on. I'm like, oh, well, we need to adjust you and we need to like do some muscle work. And he's like, it's not helping. And I was kind of in denial, honestly, that how could my kid have Lyme? Not even thinking that, oh, yeah, we fell in a den of ticks in Virginia or a bed of ticks and whatever. We pulled like 50 ticks off him. But I'm like, not my kid, right? I'm a doctor. You shouldn't have that. So I literally was in denial about that. And then finally it got to the point where it's like, no, there's something way deeper going on here. And just to give an idea, so he was a catcher in baseball, right? There's a lot of throwing, a lot of that involved. And at the time, he's 15 now. So this was like 4 years ago. He's 11, 12. Right? He couldn't even move his elbow. Like he had to physically like grab his arm and move his elbow so he could straighten it. And that was just like, he described it as glass in his elbow. Like it felt like it was that intense. And it was in his shoulder too. And so at the time, it was like, oh, we got to do some more stuff. So we started testing, muscle testing. And sure enough, Lyme disease, Bartonella, Babesia, all positive. Crap. What do I do now? And so that there's no teacher like your own family, right? When you got to work on your own family, it becomes very real and personal, and you want to figure out what it is. So then to go back, Lyme disease, what is it? Many people refer to Lyme and the co-infections as the same thing, but they're different.
Mm-hmm.
Lyme disease in of itself is a bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi, named after, forgot his first name, but uh, Borgdorf, I think that was his last name. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's a bacteria,
Yeah.
right? It's a spirochete. And then the co-infections with Lyme are Bartonella, which is another bacteria, more of like an intracellular bacteria, and then Babesia. Babesia is a parasite. It's a protozoa that gets into the red blood cells. And there are other things like Ehrlichia, um, mycoplasma, which you can get these other co-infections. But those are the main three that I've dealt with: Borrelia, Babesia, and Bartonella. And they each have different symptomology to them. And they each do like different damage to the
Mm-hmm.
body. And so going back to the story with my son, right, he's got all this pain in his elbow and his shoulder, and then the massive fatigue. And so Borrelia will get into the joints, right? It's causing inflammation as it's replicating. It's causing inflammation and it moves. It doesn't always just stay in the same joint, but it can move from joint to joint, elbow to elbow, shoulder to hip to knee. And so anytime people experience migratory joint pain, it's likely plausible that, hey, there's Lyme there.
Mm-hmm.
Fatigue can set in because of the massive inflammation that it causes, and often it's caused the great mimicker, right? It like mimics everything. It mimics chronic fatigue. It mimics fibromyalgia. Again, these are diagnoses that, what do they mean? It means, well, I'm tired all the time, or I have pain all the time. It's not really a great diagnosis, but it's what people are given. And oftentimes it can be Lyme because of how that drives pain, inflammation, stagnation in the lymph. It impacts our liver and our drainage pathways, so we can't clear toxin anymore. So then the other two, Babesia, again, is a protozoa. This one's really fascinating to me because it impacts the way that our body uses oxygen. Right? It gets into the red blood cells and it damages our hemoglobin, which is what carries oxygen. And if we can't carry oxygen, then we have massive fatigue and we may not know why, right? Like my son waking up in the morning was torture. He's like, no matter how much sleep he got, he was exhausted in the morning. And he developed these dark circles under his eyes, just dragging to get through the day. And it's like, dude, you're 11 years old. Like, what's wrong? And until we recognized what it was, then we started to make changes. And then Bartonella is the bacteria. And what I've seen a lot with that is significant leg pain, knee pain, burning. That one really messes with the brain. It seems to cause a lot of like OCD, not yourself, anxiety, depression, like a whole mix of stuff going on in the brain. So I guess that's kind of like an overview, right, of the three, and kind of how it impacted my son. And maybe as we talk more, we can talk about what we did for him and what we do for others. But that just kind of, age doesn't matter, right? He was 11. I've got patients that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s. It can also get into our nervous system. And that's where it really wreaks havoc, because then it seems like nothing's working. Like, why am I not well I'm trying all this stuff, I'm doing all these things, but yet there's still massive pain and inflammation, and I'm just not myself.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's you use a very key concept here, and I think it's mimicking, right?
Yes.
And like you said, a lot of people, they go to the doctor, they tell them the symptoms, and then because they don't know exactly what they might be dealing with, or are not thinking with all the tools in their box, then they're just, oh, here you have fibromyalgia, like you mentioned, or you have this and that, and then it's just that then it goes unnoticed, right? And it goes undiagnosed, and it goes just, then you leave the doctor with potentially more medications that you could or want to be taken or should be taken, but you're still not feeling well, and you're not getting to that root cause. And
Right.
And the neurological effect, right? That Lyme and co-infections can definitely have, specifically with OCD, because a lot of people, unfortunately, right, may be impacted or have been diagnosed, given a diagnosis or self-diagnosis of OCD or ADHD, or how that impacts. And I think the impact on kids specifically. I was interviewing another practitioner, and she was talking about like this growing pains. What is, yes, your
Right.
body's growing, but what is exactly a growing pain? How do we know that it's not being that kid's body is not being affected by some sort of pathogen that is just aggravating and creating more inflammation in their system? So that's very interesting. That the great mimicker, I think they called it, right?
Yeah. And one of the challenges with it is often when people go to the doctor and they maybe the person, not the doctor, maybe the patient suspects Lyme. And the first question is, well, did you have a rash?
Yeah.
Did you have a bullseye rash? No, I don't recall seeing that. Oh, then you don't have Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the case, right? Because the Borrelia erythromigrans, which is the bullseye rash, sometimes that appears, but it doesn't have to. If it's enveloped in something else, then you're not going to get that response. Or if it's on your head, right? How are you going to see it? Or if it's somewhere else in your body that you may not even notice like your back. How many people look at their back? Some
Yeah.
do. Kids don't, right? And Lyme is something that it doesn't have to be acute. And I think that many doctors are looking for the acute thing. Well, there was no bullseye rash. Um, there's no such thing as chronic Lyme. Your body dealt with it, so it's not that. And then it goes misdiagnosed.
Yeah.
Or if they run a test, Western blot or ELISA, which
Mm-hmm.
are highly inaccurate, you got a lot of false negatives with those.
True.
Then someone goes sometimes the next 10, 20 years undiagnosed because they ruled that out,
Yeah.
right? Quote unquote. And so they kind of cast it aside and they don't look for it until it comes up again, and another practitioner or someone that understands Lyme is like, we need to do some more diving into this and do some more extensive blood work or labs that are way more specific than the traditional, and really find out, is this an underlying condition? And there are labs that show that. I don't think there's any one lab that's 100% accurate,
Yeah.
but there's some that are pretty close.
Yeah.
So, but that's the danger with Lyme, though, is that it can go undiagnosed, and then people just go through the mental hoops of, what's my problem? Why do I have these problems when they've been told it's not Lyme, but they don't know what it is?
Yeah, no, true. And you bring a very interesting point, testing. I think because if Lyme disease is still something that has not been 100% acknowledged as something that it is real, something that it is happening to people, um, and not a lot of people are well educated or versed on the science and what to look for, then the testing obviously is not going to be as accurate, or it's going to be faulty.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I work with Vibrant America, which
Mm-hmm.
I find their Tick 2.0 um, test it's super, it helps you so much, right? Because you're not
Oh,
only
yeah.
looking at the potential, um, right now, is there an active infection, or is this a recurrence of a past infection, or is your system just recognizing that at some point there was something there? And I was having a clinical conversation with reviewing labs from a client last week, and we were just sort of kind of joking around, and we're like, it's almost like the CDC doesn't want to, like their parameters on what, how someone should be diagnosed or given a diagnosis of Lyme. There's so many things that have to be in check, and numbers, and for a lab to say, okay, yes, you do have Lyme. And I'm like, wait, but how long ago were those different numbers, stipulated by the CDC? When did they say that? And she's like, oh, a long time ago. So it's just very interesting. We're not caught up with the times, and I think the epidemic of Lyme disease is happening right now, and we need to come up with with the testing needs to catch up with what is going on with people.
We do. And I agree. I really love the Vibrant 2.0 test, the Tick-borne 2.0. And something else that interesting is, some will say, well, Lyme is not in every state, or it's not, it's not here. It's not, well, it is.
Yeah.
Lyme is everywhere. They found evidence of Lyme disease in every single state. I can't say throughout the world, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that it's prevalent in
Yeah.
most places. I won't say all, but they found evidence of Lyme in every single state. And then there's so much travel, right? Who's to say just because you live in a certain place that, oh, you can't have it because Lyme doesn't exist in that place? Well, maybe I traveled somewhere that was Lyme. Is that possible? I mean, yeah. And so place, geography, I would really cast that aside for looking at diagnoses as well, because of those factors.
Yeah.
Um, and something else, I think that there is more light on Lyme right now, maybe because of celebrities, quote unquote, that have had Lyme and that have had serious battles with it. And it's like, oh, that person had Lyme and that person had Lyme. This isn't why they're performing anymore. And so I think there is more light on it, but there definitely needs to be more, because
Yeah.
it's a big deal.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think so ticks are not the only way in which one could
Right.
have Lyme, right? So what are some of the other ways in which we could potentially have Lyme?
Yeah. So ticks are the most common, and it does not have to be just a deer tick,
Mm-hmm.
right? Any blood-borne vector of transmission. So spider, even like bed bugs, mosquitoes, right? Anything that's transmitting blood can transmit Lyme.
Yeah.
And so you're like, dude, I got bit by 3, 4 mosquitoes last night, just walking from the park back to my house. And, could it be that easy? Well, yeah, it could.
Yeah.
I remember I do a lot of running, and there was, in Virginia, it was always in the woods, right? It was like my Zen place.
Mm.
But I can't tell you the amount of spider webs I ran through, not seeing them. I'm the first person out in the morning. I'm tall. And so, you get like spider web all in your face. And there were a couple times when I came back over probably a 5-year period where it's like, man, I was bit by something. Where is it?
Mm.
And then a couple of days later, I see this massive like rash, or not rash, but like a big old, thing on my leg. I'm like, dude, okay, let's start doing some work on that. Again, fortunately, I've never had Lyme like others, but this vector of transmission can be multiple. And I think something really important to share is it can pass in utero,
True.
right? This can go from mother to fetus through the bloodstream. And this isn't meant to scare people, but that's important to know, that if your infant, your toddler is showing signs of like, why aren't they thriving? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why aren't they growing? Why are they not, they're talking about it hurts, or they're crying. There's so many reasons for that.
Yeah.
But if there is a history of Lyme disease in the family or in the mother, then I don't want to say that it's 100%, but it's likely, it's probable that your son or daughter has Lyme and the other co-infections, because it does pass in utero.
Yeah. Just things to be aware of, things to
Oh,
indication, yeah, symptoms to be in the lookout for, and that's very interesting that it is true. Would you what about, like, so let's say someone has had Lyme, and they did, the most common practice is antibiotics.
yep.
And we know that, it's as well researched now. And I think a lot of people are aware that, one, like antibiotics, while they have their place, sometimes they can be a life and death situation, right? They definitely have their place. They also create a lot of um GI issues, right? Like intestinal issues.
100%. Yep.
And unfortunately, one batch of antibiotics can unfortunately set someone back 7 years, right? You could take you 7 years to recover from antibiotic use. And I think now and nowadays, people are given less amount of time to be taking the antibiotics. But I think in the past, some people used to have to do several courses of it, or longer periods of time. Again, I think we're just becoming more aware as to the use of antibiotics when it comes to Lyme. But one of the things that I think it's fair to talk about is that while the antibiotics might be going after the bacteria, they're not going after another potential contributor. It's the symptoms are still there, the disease is still there, the chronic illness, which is parasites.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering if you could share your opinion about the role of parasites in Lyme disease and co-infections.
Absolutely. And before I do that, right, there's Lyme also produces biofilm, right?
Mm,
And for those people that don't know what biofilm is, it's like an invisible force field, right?
mhm.
And it protects the bacteria so that our immune system, antibiotics, other things don't readily get into those biofilms, and yet the bacteria can still let things out,
Yeah.
right? So it's an unlevel playing field, right? Where we can't affect it in the biofilm, but it can still impact us. And
Yeah.
that can be throughout the body. And so antibiotics don't touch biofilms. And that's an important thing to note, that there are other things that they can. But going to the parasites, right? I find that, and maybe I'll bring up two things here: parasites and mold
Mm,
are massive impact for Lyme, because you could have Lyme, you could have no symptoms at all
mhm.
of Lyme disease. And then you get into a moldy house, and sorry, I may be jumping ahead, but you go into mold or you have a traumatic experience, and now all of a sudden, why do I have all these symptoms?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? And it was the trauma or the mold exposure or exposure to some toxic chemical that weakened your immune system. And now these critters come out and like, hey, we can play, we can do our thing. So that's really important to know. Parasites play a huge role in this because, I mean, the parasites are commensal with us, right?
Yeah.
So are bacteria, so are viruses, so are fungi. It's when they get out of control, I think, because of toxin and inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Lyme going on that's creating this massive inflammation. Parasites are garbage cans, essentially. They eat trash in the body, but they can get completely out of control.
Yeah.
And they can take over and infest not only the gut, but our lungs, our organs, our muscles, and they themselves become a huge problem because it's not just the parasite, it's also their waste products, right?
Mm.
They're eliminating into our body, which is kind of nasty to think about that we have something like pooping in us, but it's true. And the things that they excrete are probably more toxic than the parasite itself. The parasite itself is going to strip us of nutrients, right? In many cases, it's going to consume what we're eating to some part so that we have nutrient deficiency, which now means our immune system, our immune function is not as great.
Mm-hmm.
Our GI system is not as optimal functioning. So it's really easy. It becomes like a breeding ground for other pathogens. And parasites are something that people are like, I'll share me. When I first met Dr. Watts and he was talking about parasites, I'm like, dude, I've never been out of the country. I don't have parasites.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, I can check. I'm like, what do you mean you can check? What are you going to do? And he's like, well, let me see your pulse. I'm like, okay, are you some kind of like a mystical dude that you feel something in my pulse? He checks my pulse. He's like, you have parasites. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're alive. He's like, you have parasites. Everyone living has parasites. How are you impacted by them? And I'm like, oh, well, that's a different question. Okay. So I began to kind of believe that. And then seeing is believing for me with parasites, because I'm like, I was still kind of really. But then when I started taking some different products for it, it was like, okay, they're there. But again, going back to your question, parasites are, I think, so detrimental to us because of what they do to our body,
Mm-hmm.
the inflammatory condition they cause throughout. Again, not just the gut, but our lungs, our pancreas, our liver, our kidneys, and they impact our ability to drain
Mm-hmm.
and to clear toxicity such that our bucket becomes full, it overflows, and now our body is having a really hard time healing. And so now we have multiple layers of toxicity, pathogenesis going on.
Yeah.
And we wonder what the heck is wrong with me. I have all these symptoms. The doctor says you're like, we have no idea how to help you. You're on 5, 10, 15 medications and nothing's working.
Yeah.
Root cause, right? Parasites, Lyme, mold, emotion, toxins. I mean, those are all the root cause, the heart of disease process and inflammation.
It's true. I was reading Dr. J. Davidson's book. I can't quite remember the title, but I'll include it in the show notes so people can refer to it. But I love that book. It was so easy to understand. Such a great manual if you are someone who's new to wanting to understand how Lyme disease could be impacting you, how important is to make sure that you're eliminating going to the bathroom every day, not feeling puffy, sleeping, right? And then the parasites and how that the role that plays on chronic illness. And I was like, wow. So now almost it's part of my homework. Every client that I see, I'm like, okay, this book, you have to get this book, get the audiobook. You're going to end up getting a hard copy of it. And it just brought so much awareness, not only as a practitioner, but also as an amazing tool to be educating others, because it's hard. I sometimes people don't want to hear about they've been working on their health so much, especially someone who's been chronically ill. They've been already spending money and time. They've been seeing so many other practitioners, doctors, been bounced from one place to the other. and they might not be willing to yet another person who may say, hey,
Sure.
I am going to help you. So I think education is such a big part of um, people understanding why they're doing, why are they taking a supplement, why are they working on emotions, why are they working on lifestyle changes, and how themselves, you see them change, you see their household change, and it's just it can also sometimes be a magical transformation when people, you put them on the correct support, you put them on the correct lifestyles, and then they're like, oh wow, I am feeling better. So
You know what I find is, and you kind of alluded to this, is that people want to be heard.
yeah.
They want to be understood, right? They don't want to just be thrown a take this, take that. And I find that the heart is missing in a lot of, not the patient's heart, but the doctor's heart
Mm-hmm.
is missing a lot in terms of treatment, because there's so much. I mean, you take someone that's been chronically ill for a year, let alone 30 years,
Yeah.
right? And what has that done to them from an emotional standpoint? And how do they feel about themselves? They used to be thriving. They used to be like, I can go outdoors. I can do this. I can take I can go to the grocery store. And now for some, it's like, I can't even like hardly get out of bed and get to my front door.
Yeah.
And acknowledging that, validating that, giving space for that, and not being so quick to judge or to put a protocol on someone and say, here, you need to do this, because there becomes almost a distrust of, not because of the individual, but because, man, I've been to like 20, 30 people and I'm told the same thing every time. So I think that component of it is so needed,
Mm-hmm.
and it's often missing.
Yeah.
Um, and then you alluded to this as well. You often can't just go straight after the Lyme disease, right? Like people want to thrust antibiotics on it, or even if it's herbal, right? Even if they're herbal and they're killers, meaning killing bacteria, pathogens. What if somebody's not prepared for that?
Yeah.
And I find that treatment, I'll liken it to this: if you're in a dark room, right? Your eyes have been closed, blinded, shielded, whatever. And then somebody throws the curtains back and it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, full sun. You're not going to be like, oh, this is amazing. It's going to be like, oh, man, that hurts my eyes.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the standard of care for Lyme and other things, is just let's kill it.
Yeah.
It's not the way to go. We've got to prepare the body. And preparing the body is going back and opening up these pathways so they can actually drain via the lymphatic system, via the liver, getting them pooping. I
Yeah.
can't tell you how many people I've had that I'll ask the question, do you have a bowel movement regularly? They're like, oh yeah. I'm like, okay, what does that mean?
Right.
Oh, well, I go like every other day. I'm like, okay, so that's consistent, but that's not optimal. And you're not eliminating well. There's a lot of toxicity built up. And if you're trying to kill a pathogen, which is then going to create more inflammation,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not eliminating this stuff, again, it just accumulates even more. So now in many cases, people already feel cruddy. Now they're trying to kill something in their body, and now they feel worse,
Yeah.
right? And I'm sure, I mean, I've seen that. I've had patients with that. I've been the recipient of that with my son. Tried to do too much too fast,
Yeah.
and he's like, I feel way worse. Like, what am I supposed to do now? And it's like, okay, let's back up.
Yeah.
What are we not addressing? And do we need to help drainage? Do we need help support the liver, the
Mm-hmm.
kidneys, the lymphatic system more? Do we need to bind more, to use the right binders to grab up all this garbage?
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think it's, how are we draining? How are we eliminating? Is there congestion in the lymph? And can we identify that and help that before we try to go in with napalm and kill everything?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, true. Yeah. And I feel like um listening to people, right? Meeting them where they're at. It's important. And um if you've ever been told, no, this is it's all in your head, it's hormones, or it's, yeah, your kid is just growing, or it's, yeah, just don't settle for that, because you are your best advocate. If you're not feeling well, say something, like really do go and look for the solutions. I had a client in tears literally the other day who said, I can't believe you believe what I'm going through.
Right. Isn't that crazy that they're like you may be the first one. I may be the first one. I've had that so many times where, wait, you believe me?
Yeah.
Like, well,
Yeah.
why wouldn't I? It's
I
your
know.
experience. Like, I have nothing to judge that against.
Yeah.
And I'm just in shock that, I mean, that sometimes shocks me. Like, why wouldn't someone believe what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
No, it's, yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're like, if this speaks to you, please look for answers. Because they're out there. And so you touched on something very specific that I like to talk about is mold. You talked about it a little bit, but I think a lot of us unknowingly are mold toxic, and that was my experience. I never knew that I had mold. I have never been chronically ill. I've had my issues, weight loss, weight loss, resistance, hormones, like I guess your typical stuff, right? And but I never knew like why my weight will yo-yo all the time, or what I have a hard time losing weight, or why sometimes I'm not irritated, but sometimes I am, or whatever. And then 3 years ago was at a lecture in Orlando by Dr. Jessica Pietros, and
yeah.
all she talked about was mold. And she was, the 3 lectures that she did, I was like, and she's such an amazing doctor, and she was just so passionate about everything that she was talking. I was like, that's me. Check, 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 check. So I come home and I'm like to my practitioner, hey, you gotta check me for mold, because honestly, I think we're onto something. And I grew up in Mexico City. And was born and raised in Mexico City. So we talked about parasites, right? How like third world country kind of problem, right? Or something, that misconception. And I'm like, and I never had parasites. Like never, parasites were never an issue for me. I'm like, yeah, right. I mean, I used to eat stands on the corner of the street. I bet parasites, they're just haven't shown up. So I did a mold protocol, super intense. And I'm a little like over the board, where I'm like, just give it to me. Don't sugarcoat it. I'm just going to go hardcore. And I did 3 weeks of hell. So I don't recommend it for everyone. Everyone is different. Definitely make sure you follow your practitioner's recommendations. Make sure your body is ready. But, and it was literally like I could taste plastic in my mouth. I could get like whiffs of chlorine, even if I wasn't near chlorine. And I had this body odor for 10, 15 years that I could just not get rid of. And one day I get out of the shower and I'm like, oh my God, I don't stink anymore, and I was all those toxins that my body was getting rid of. And then shortly after, boom, parasites show up, and I start doing a parasite protocol. And yes, right, the proof is in the toilet. When you see stuff that you're like, oh gosh, that doesn't look like a normal bowel movement, but okay.
Got
And
Lyme.
yes, yes. And I just started feeling better. I mean, my weight more managed, my hormones more in check and balanced. And so mold, how does mold play a role in holding Lyme in the system? If you
That's a
could,
really good question.
yeah.
So we'll be a little bit like get into the thick of some immunology for a sec. And I'm not an immunologist, but generally, like we have Th1 and Th2 response, right?
Hmm.
And from what I've learned, our Th1 response is going to address bacteria, viruses. Our Th2 response is going to address more of the parasitic side of things,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of in between. Parasites, when the macrophage hits the parasite, it'll send a signal to our Th1 response inhibiting that. So
Hmm.
now it becomes a challenge for our body to address bacteria and viruses. Well, on top of that is where mold sits, where mold will suppress our immune function in general. And it bogs that whole system down so that now we don't really mount an immune response to much of anything. Yet our inflammation is rampant and massive, and mold can activate mast cells, which then we start to become reactive to. And mold, I'll say, let me go back on mold. Mold is like, it can come from multiple different things: corn, wheat, different foods, different fruits, vegetables, and what most commonly known is like water damage, right? So you have a leak somewhere and it gets into the drywall. And the way that our homes are built today, it is a breeding ground for mold. And it doesn't take much water for mold to start to grow. And I mean, less than 24 hours, and there's already mold spores that are growing. And then those mold spores want to keep producing so that they then put out what are called mycotoxin.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what people really get into the body, is the mycotoxin, which it wants to kill everything in sight so that that mold can keep growing. And in our body, there are several. I mean, there are so many different types of mycotoxin. And essentially, they do damage to our liver, our kidneys, our nervous system. They inhibit our ability to make ATP, which is our fuel for energy in the body. They absolutely affect our brain chemistries, our endocrine system. So they really wreak havoc on the body, all systems, all mechanisms. And the challenge with mold is you could have a couple in the same home, and one is like deathly ill, I can't get out of bed. And the other is like, what's the problem? I'm fine. There's nothing here.
Yeah.
And so that sensitivity can be very different for people. And again, this is where listening and hearing and not judging that individual, but being open to what they have to share,
Mm-hmm.
and then starting to look for clues. And so when I suspect mold, people come to me and they're like, I'm just so fatigued.
Yeah.
My brain doesn't work. It feels like there's this cloak over my brain that I can't remember things. I walk into a room, I have no idea why I went there. It takes me forever to come up with words. Um, and then the fatigue. I went to the grocery store and I came back and now I'm laid up for the next 3 days. I can't. And there are literally people like that, right? You've had those experiences with patients,
Mm-hmm.
and it's this is what mycotoxin does. And so again, you can't kill mycotoxin in the body. You have to bind it and drain it. And in order to do that, you have to have your lymphatic system working and your liver working. And this is where that preparation for helping support those pathways is really important. And there's not a one size fits all approach to this because of I think the individuality of how people are, their wiring and what works. There are some binders that are great. Some I've found that, oh, you can't tolerate that at all. Like we've got to go super small doses of things. Um, and so it's very individual, but I'll touch on this. Getting the mold out of the body is really important. Getting the mold out of your environment
Mm-hmm.
is essential, because you will never heal if the mold is in your environment. And I think this is where it gets more tricky with people, because there's a ton of uncertainty and a ton of fear, right? You call a mold inspector, found it, took care of it, I'm still sick.
Yeah.
Call another mold inspector, right? And it's hard to find a reliable one. I think that personally, Yes We Inspect are the best.
Yeah.
They don't do any remediation work, right? They come in and find it and give you a plan, but then it's, oh, now who's going to do the work? And so I think all of those factors create, and we need to understand this for our patients. And then I think patients need to understand this as well. It's, okay, what is my next step?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at, oh my gosh, all the stuff I have to do, and potentially how much money is that going to cost me? Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands? It depends on the severity of it. But I think that, okay, what is my one next step?
Yeah.
Is there someone I need to call? Okay, can I just make that call? Oh, well, what's going to happen if I make that call? I need to make the call. And then you just, again, take that one next step. But
Mm-hmm.
the take home point is, you won't heal if there's still mold in your environment. So whatever it takes to get out of that environment. And currently I'm working with people that they've moved out of their home. They are having it completely redone. It's been, I think they've been, 6 months out of their home? I mean, that's like totally uprooted,
Yeah.
right? They've gotten rid of everything, and literally everything. They have to get new mattresses. They have to get anything porous. They've had to replace. So we're talking clothing. We're think of porous structures.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a very slow move-in process. And yet there's excitement because, okay, our environment is going to be safe.
Yeah.
And I had another patient that same thing. They found mold. They're like, we can't live in this environment. They up and moved, right? Uprooted their entire life, actually moved out of their state to a different state to where a drier climate, something that was better. They tested the home they were going to move in, multiple times just to make sure. But you want to be safe in your environment, right? If you can't feel safe in your environment, then there's always going to be this elevated stress. And yeah, we all heal in stress, right?
Yeah.
Right. You can't digest, you don't heal, you get sick easier. So take home with that is it's going to be some work to clean up the environment, but you have to ask yourself, is my health worth it? Am I worth it to do this? And I think oftentimes it does come back to that belief of, am I worth my family doing all this? And the answer is 100% yes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I believe that we're all divine children of God. And if we're important to God, then we're pretty darn valuable. And yes, we're worth taking the effort and doing it to allow ourselves to heal. Because there's so much of us that each of us have to give, not have to, but can give to bless and benefit the lives of others. And so, yeah, we're worth healing because we're now going to be able to heal and help other people. And who best to do it than someone that's been in that situation, that's come out of it, to help somebody else or to help, 1, 10, 100, 1,000.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's very powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And so what are some of protocols that you would, recommend if someone says, well, I think I have Lyme. I really want to check it out. Where could I start from? What would be your recommendation?
So I do think it's important to test, right? You want to know, do I have Lyme? That still might be false negative, right? I think steps that I'm now taking with my own patients is, my first is, I want you to get outside. I want you to put your feet on the earth. I want you to breathe. I want you to have good water, right? Because now they may say, well, I'm really fatigued, I'm tired. That's fine. Put your feet on concrete. I think there's such a benefit to being connected to our environment. If we've disconnected from our environment, we need to reconnect because there is an energy to this earth. That's why it's called Mother Earth, right? It's loving, it's nurturing, it's healing. And so those are actually like starting to be some of my first protocols, is get your feet back on this earth, get that energy into the body because it is healing. And then drainage, right? We need to work on, do you want specific protocol? Do you want specific things, or do you like in general? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, one, obviously everybody is going to be different, right? Everybody's going to
Yeah.
need something different, but just like a basic rundown, or like, like you were going, like, yeah,
Yeah.
grounding,
Yeah.
draining. Yeah.
In general, like some of the products I love to use are products for the lymph. So I use a lot of Cellcore products, and I feel that they're so beneficial for drainage. So getting outside, working manually on the lymph, there are some great resources online for that. And then product wise, I mean, our Advanced TUDCA is fantastic for decongesting the liver. KL support, which is working on your liver and your kidneys. Biotox binder, fantastic for binding these mycotoxins and ammonia. And minerals. Man, minerals are essential because they're like we have to have minerals. Without minerals, nothing works in our body. And so sometimes that's kind of like the foundation of what I'll start with. And we're not killing anything, right? We're not targeting any parasite or Lyme. we're really helping to support and open up these pathways in the body. And then depending on how someone does with just that basic aspect, then we can start to add on things and use some heavier things to help induce more drainage, some stronger binders, start to hit on the parasite side with the different para products, para 1 through 4. And, there's not a right or wrong way necessarily to do that. It depends on the individual.
Mm-hmm.
But I do find that working on, in most cases, I won't say all, but in most cases, I find that it's important to work on mold and then parasites. Sometimes that flips on me. Sometimes I've needed to work on the Lyme first, which it was kind of shocking to me with one patient. I was trying to go down the normal pathway and it just wasn't working. And I'm like, fine, we're just going to hit Lyme. And we started using some of the Cellcore IS products, IS Bore, and man, turned around like that. Headache started to go away, body pain went away. I'm like, okay, yes, we are all individuals and we need to look at this individually, not as, well, here I'm going to follow these, exact steps.
Right.
But in general, drainage, then mold, parasites. I think then I start to hit, Lyme and then other toxins. But I love the Cellcore products and I love them because you have this roadmap of health and there's no other, I haven't found other products that for this population are using the carbon technology they are that so assimilates with our body and it's readily available. It's healing on so many levels.
Yeah.
And it's just masterful how those have been put together. There are many other things that we use, but I find that as the base is really valuable and it helps lift people out of the chronicity of inflammation and health that they're in. The last part of this protocol is love. I can't go through this in talking without that. We can't do it for our patients, right? We can't take upon ourselves like their stuff. But man, for someone to know that they're loved, for someone to know that we really want to see their best and see them be able to express their gifts and their talents, for someone to really feel that and know that, you can't quantify what that means to a person. Yeah. There's no test, but you see it in their eyes, their voice. I think that's one of the things that I love the most about what I do is because I do love the people that I work with. And I love people in general. I think that we're inherently good and that we all have gifts and talents. And so I like to try to bring that out and remind people, even though they're in this chronic place, they're still have so much value to give, even if they can't get out of their house. I remember I had one person once, she's like, I just can't do anything. And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, I can't go help. I can't go volunteer. I can't go see this person. And I said, could you write a letter? And she's like, well, yeah, I can write a letter. I said, man, what do you feel when you receive a letter, a handwritten letter from someone? And she just kind of lit up like, oh my gosh, I love that. So it's meeting people where they are. And you can't quantify that in a protocol, but it's so essential. And it's so beautiful when you have that connection and you see that begin to help change their state, change their health, how they view themselves. It's really, I love that the most.
Yeah, that is true because you gain that you build that relationship with with clients, with patients, and then they know that you are with them through the bad and the good, and no matter what healing crisis or whatever might be happening during a protocol of addressing Lyme co-infections, mold, parasites, chemicals, whatever, you're there with them. And it is a journey for both practitioner and recipient so that they're both you make progress with them. When my clients have successes and wins, I grow as a practitioner. I learn from my clients, and it's a team effort. Now, if someone is like, oh my gosh, I am so ready to start working with Dr. Randy now, how would one go about finding you, finding your practice? Do you work with people only locally? You work people with people from all over the world, the states? What do you do?
That's a great question. Yeah, we work with people literally all over the world. We do a lot of things virtually. I'd say 95% of our practice is virtual. So you can find us at totalbodywellnessclinic.com. Don't forget the clinic. It's totalbodywellnessclinic.com. We're on Instagram. The podcast is Restore the Real. And yeah, that's the best way to find us is those two places, totalbodywellnessclinic.com and Restore the Real on Instagram or podcast places. And we have a wonderful staff. I love our staff, and they're pretty phenomenal. So the
That's great.
doctors that we work with are awesome. So that's the best place to find us.
Perfect. Yeah. So we'll make sure to add all the contact information for both your clinic, your social media accounts, as well as your podcast, so that we can continue to empower people and help people from all over the world get better and overcome these chronic illnesses that they might be experiencing either newly or they've been experiencing for a very long time.
Thanks so much. This has been awesome. I love the conversation. Love talking with you. Just really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Randy, for taking time to speak in and educating us about important subjects. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.